The Biden administration is filing this lawsuit against Georgia not because it thinks it's going to win, but because it's got to do something. What you're going to be hearing in the spin from Democrats is the justifiable outrage about this. But I want to give you the lay of the land of what's happening here, and this goes back to H.R. 1 dying in the Senate the other day. H.R. 1 was the Democrats' messaging bill on election reform, the For the People Act, and Democrats around the country decided that it was a must-pass to save democracy. You had to pass this legislation if you were going to save democracy, and it died in the Senate. Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema would not get rid of the filibuster, so it is dead. Behind the scenes, there is some seething anger among partisan progressives that the Biden administration did not go to the mats for H.R. 1. Now, the Biden administration's position has always been this is a messaging bill. It's not going to pass. We're not going to burn political capital on it. But progressive activists internalized that it was necessary. I mean, you had people on CNN and MSNBC, anchors, not just talking heads, but the anchors saying that this is to preserve democracy. And so progressives believed it. So why isn't Joe Biden standing up for democracy? Because it was never meant to pass. They never even had the votes. I mean, everybody's focusing on Sinema and Manchin. What they're not focusing on is there are probably 6 other Democrats who didn't want to support it, and they knew they could keep their mouths shut knowing the filibuster wasn't going to go away. They could publicly say, I'm supporting it, even though they wouldn't. The Biden administration had no business spending political capital on H.R. 1 when it was never designed to pass. But progressive activists insisted it had to pass. So the Biden administration has to do something to placate those progressive activists. What they've done is filed a lawsuit against the state of Georgia over its legislation, but they've screwed it up in terms of timing. You've got to understand the problem with the timing. Last week, Joe Manchin, the senator from West Virginia, proposed a compromise plan. Joe Manchin's compromise plan is to embrace the Georgia voting law. He's embraced from the Georgia voting law photo ID for absentee and in-person voting, something Stacey Abrams had said was a tool of voter suppression. He's endorsed cleaning the voter rolls in the way Georgia does it, the so-called voter purges that Stacey Abrams said it suppresses the vote. He's endorsed Georgia's 19-day early voting period, which Stacey Abrams said isn't enough. And he's endorsed Georgia's absentee ballot voting plan, which Stacey Abrams says is bad. And what happened? Stacey Abrams, after Joe Manchin came out with the compromise plan that included voter purges, voter ID, early voting, and absentee balloting modeled on Georgia, Stacey Abrams came out and said, yeah, this is a good plan. If it applies nationwide, it's a great compromise. Let's do voter purges. Let's do photo ID. All the stuff she said were bad in Georgia, she's now embraced. And only then does DOJ come out and sue Georgia. You almost get the suspicion that they're trying to step on Stacey Abrams here, maybe to benefit Raphael Warnock in 2022 in Georgia, so Abrams doesn't overshadow him. But the timing is peculiar because Abrams just agreed to all of the stuff that DOJ now says is bad and is going to sue about. Abrams the other day agreed to all of it because Manchin proposed it. And by the way, it's still not going to pass the Senate. The ramifications here are actually kind of staggering politically. Stacey Abrams is going to be sidelined now because the Department of Justice, their lawsuit will predominate. Remember, Abrams has already filed a lawsuit. Stacey Abrams is already suing about the law. It hasn't got a lot of attention. Now the Department of Justice is intervening. They're going to file a lawsuit, and Abrams' suit is going to be overshadowed by the Department of Justice lawsuit. Additionally, here's something you need to understand about the Department of Justice. They're very conservative in their legal approach. The reason they've become very conservative in their legal approach is because of Bob McDonnell. Bob McDonnell was the Virginia governor. He was a Republican. He was indicted and prosecuted and found guilty. The DOJ prosecuted him over corruption, and his case was thrown out by the United States Supreme Court. And thereafter, several other major DOJ cases were thrown out. They overplayed their hand, and they've gotten very conservative since in their legal strategy and how they advance cases. So Abrams and other progressive groups have filed a bunch of lawsuits against this Georgia law already, making massive claims about the lawsuit. The Department of Justice's legal strategy has gotten so conservative, they're not going to make a lot of the same complaints, or a lot of same complaints. which is going to impact the fundraising for these progressive groups. Why isn't the DOJ saying this? If this is true, why isn't the DOJ claiming it? That's going to be the logical question. I mean, if Abrams is saying all of these crazy things about Georgia's law and the Department of Justice does not reflect those things in their own lawsuit, it's going to make Abrams look a little bit over dramatic. This really helps Brian Kemp. Brian Kemp is the governor of Georgia, and Chris Carr is the attorney general in Georgia. Brian Kemp and Chris Carr are up for re-election in 2022. Donald Trump has been targeting Brian Kemp explicitly and Chris Carr implicitly. He explicitly wants to find someone to run against Brian Kemp. They think maybe they found a candidate. We'll get into that here later. Brian Kemp now gets to battle Joe Biden in court to defend the election law that Donald Trump praised. Donald Trump is implicitly trying to find someone to run against Chris Carr. He's not openly antagonizing Chris Carr, but he also believes that Chris Carr did not do enough to defend him. And there are Trump activists in Georgia who have been trying to find someone to challenge Chris Carr. Now Chris Carr and Brian Kemp last week took on woke culture and critical race theory. This week get to be sued by Joe Biden and fight in court. Several political operatives I've talked to this morning said this is like Christmas in June for Brian Kemp. One of them said that Joe Biden, had he wrapped this up and stuck it under the tree, couldn't have given Brian Kemp a better present. I mean, a lot of Christmas analogies floating out there among the GOP today. This helps Brian Kemp. Brian Kemp gets to go to Trump voters and say, hey, Joe Biden, he's not suing Donald Trump, he's suing me and Georgia, and I'm fighting them for that law that you people wanted. I am fighting for you. I'm preserving this law. Good luck, Vernon Jones. I mean, Vernon Jones is the Island of Misfit Toys candidate against Brian Kemp. It's amazing to watch the Trump supporters. They couldn't find a credible candidate yet, so they rushed to Vernon Jones, who's not a credible candidate. And Vernon Jones every day comes out, so when I'm governor of Georgia, I'm going to sign an executive order banning critical race theory. Brian Kemp already did that. The other day, he said something else. When he's governor of Georgia, he's going to do something. I forget what it was, but it's something Brian Kemp had already done. Vernon Jones cannot say Joe Biden is suing me and I'm defending Georgia. He can't say that. Brian Kemp can. This gives Brian Kemp a major present from the Biden administration, and it totally undermines Stacey Abrams. The DOJ case will overshadow Abrams, and they waited until after Abrams embraced photo ID and voter purges. And now, here comes the Department of Justice. This is somewhat ironic, then hilarious. The Department of Justice rushes out and says, oh, voter purges and photo ID for absentee ballot, they're bad. Nuh-uh, Stacey Abrams just said they're not racist. And now you're saying they're designed to suppress black people. Stacey Abrams the other day said, no, they are not designed to suppress the black vote. After Joe Manchin proposed. Yes, Stacey Abrams last year said they were, but when Joe Manchin proposed the same damn thing last week, Stacey Abrams said, no, they're not racist at all. We're totally fine with photo ID. It's going to be very, very hard for the Democrats to thread this. Meanwhile, Brian Kemp and Chris Carr get to be waving big flags and say, woohoo, Joe Biden's suing me, vote for me. I mean, all you've got to do if you're Brian Kemp now, Donald Trump can come to Georgia, barnstorm the state, and say, don't vote for Brian Kemp. And all Brian Kemp has to say is, Joe Biden's suing me, not him, and I'm fighting for you. And guess what's going to happen? This is a very big present for Brian Kemp, and it totally cuts the legs out from under Stacey Abrams' arguments, particularly her flip-flop in the past week, and it deprives her of a fundraising tool. Why would you give money to Stacey Abrams' group that's suing Georgia when you're already paying taxes to the federal government and they're suing Georgia with a more reasonable and plausible case? The timing on this could not have been worse for Stacey Abrams, and it could not have been better for Brian Kemp, because it comes right as the Trump team thinks they found someone more credible than Vernon Jones to run against him. And now the wind is going to be out of their sails as Brian Kemp gets to barnstorm the state and tell everybody, Joe Biden's suing us and I'm fighting him and Chris Carr's fighting him. My goodness gracious. But you got to keep the bottom line here in mind. What is this really about? It's not about winning the case. It's never been about winning the case. Part of it is about stalling the case until after the 2022 election. They want to drag it out so it can't be implemented in 2022. The other thing that's going on here, though, is the whole reason for the lawsuit is not because of the merits of the lawsuit, is because Joe Biden pissed off the progressive base by not supporting H.R. 1. And now he's got to get the attorney general out there and do damage control for him and say, hey, we're going to sue Georgia with that law you all hate. When the New York Times just last week did a story and said, actually, we kind of overblew the case on Georgia. It's actually a pretty reasonable bill. So they wait until all of the major media outlets and Stacey Abrams come out and concede that Georgia's law really isn't as bad as they claimed, and now they're going to file a lawsuit. Had H.R. 1 passed, they would have never done it. But more importantly, had Joe Biden thrown any political capital behind H.R. 1, they would have never filed the lawsuit. Because H.R. 1 did not pass, and Joe Biden refused to even talk up the legislation and spend political capital trying to get it passed, they've got to file a foolhardy lawsuit that undermines Stacey Abrams in Georgia and helps Brian Kemp in Georgia because they pissed off the progressive base nationally. And now they got to say, look, we're fighting for you in federal court in a state where Donald Trump appointed all the judges. Good luck with that.